Good evening, everyone. We're going to start in just a couple minutes. We've got a lot of people joining tonight, so we want to give just a couple more minutes before we start, so just bear with us. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today's presentation, Introducing Energy Storage Solutions. In January, Connecticut's Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, PURA, launched Energy Storage Solutions, a battery storage incentive program in Eversource and United Illuminating Territories. This program is overseen by PURA, is paid for by electric ratepayers, and it is administered by the Connecticut Green Bank, Eversource and UI. My name is Rudy Sturck, Associate Director of Marketing at the Connecticut Green Bank, and tonight you will hear from my Green Bank colleagues, Ed Kranich, Senior Manager of Incentive Programs, and Emma Saavedra, Associate of Incentive Programs. And if you can go to the next slide. So we're going to start tonight with a couple of quick poll questions to help get some data and information about our audience. We'll then give an overview of Energy Storage Solutions program, followed by some specific details on the residential incentives, including costs and benefits and how to get started. If you have questions during the presentation, please use the question box and we will do our best to answer them at the end of the presentation. So now we're going to launch our first poll question. So please take a second and answer the question on the screen. What brings you here today? Is it pairing your existing solar PV system with storage, adding a new solar system and storage, getting battery storage without solar, or for some other reason? Great, so everyone, as the answers are coming in, a very high percentage of you are here because you want to pair an existing system with storage, about almost 90%. So that is excellent for us to know. So on to the next poll real quick. In the event of an outage, what electrical devices are most important to you? And here you can click more than one choice here, so please select as many, the most important ones for you. So we're seeing most, very high percentage are choosing refrigerator, freezer, heating and cooling as their top two, followed by about 50% at lighting. So this is great. We appreciate those answers, very helpful for us as we roll out the program. So now I'm actually going to turn it over to Ed Cranich to take us through the program itself.
Thanks, Rudy. And just a quick note, can you hear me okay? Coming through all right?
Sounds great, Ed. Yep.
See the slides? Okay, thanks. And again, we encourage you, if you have questions as we go, to submit it through the question panel, and we'll get to them at the end. Great to collect them as they come in. So what is energy storage? Well, it comes in many forms. Our laptops and phones and cars all have batteries, which is a form of energy storage. Your water heater is a form of energy storage because it heats up water and stores it in the tank. Even the gas tank in your car is a form of energy storage because the fuel itself takes energy to create, put it in the gas station, and eventually it becomes a portable source of energy to put in your car and run your engine on. Large-scale grid projects can even come in the form of massive underground caverns filled with compressed air that can run machinery, or water that's pumped uphill and then run through a hydroelectric dam when it's needed. But why do we do this? It's because we want to generate energy now for whatever reason, maybe because it's plentiful, it's easy to produce, and we want to use it later at a time where it's not as easy to produce. But again, why do we want to do this in Connecticut, and why now? So this chart here, forgive its complexity, it shows how power is generated and used in the state and among most states, really. So the way that we use energy is not constant. We wake up and we turn the lights on. So you can see here when the sun goes up on this chart, that this bottom chart here, the solid line, is the overall grid demand. So when we wake up, we turn the lights on, and then we turn them off when we go to school or work for the morning and afternoon. And then in the afternoon, it starts to ramp back up. And then in the evening, when everyone's at home, our power usage goes up. When you overlay the way solar power is generated, like many of you have solar panels, it doesn't really coincide with those peaks. The best time to be producing energy is when you're not really using very much of it. So that's a great way to bring in batteries so that you can charge during all this yellow shaded time here on the chart. You can charge your batteries with your solar PV, and then you can use it later in the day, like in the evening when the sun is no longer up. The good part about batteries is that even if you don't have solar PV, you can do this. You can charge the battery in the evening when, after say 11 p.m. or in the morning, and you can use it throughout the day. So you can offset these really big peak times by discharging the battery during that time. So those peak times, like in the late evening, require more expensive power plants for the grid to run, and they put a strain on the grid, and it's more expensive. It usually will use more emission-heavy fuel, sometimes even something like kerosene or coal, for these really intense peaks that may only happen a few times during the year. So Energy Storage Solutions is aiming to solve for that by smoothing out those peaks, by distributing more batteries or encouraging more folks to get batteries in their homes, to help kind of smooth out those really peak energy demand times. So what are we talking about with battery energy storage? These are the types of batteries that we're referring to when we say battery energy storage. Some of you familiar with off-grid solar PV and backup power from a decade or more ago might think of these big banks of deep cycle lead acid batteries, which is essentially just an array of car batteries. Today's technology is not like that anymore. It's smarter, has a lower footprint, higher energy density, and it requires less maintenance. Batteries from companies such as Enphase, SolarEdge, Tesla, Generac, and others. And just to note, we don't make any endorsement of any particular manufacturer or model. We have a process by which all of these manufacturers and others that are not shown here can apply to become eligible to offer their technology in our program. So, we're open to anyone as long as they can meet our requirements, in dispatching to the grid and kind of their ability to interact with the grid. So the next slide, just to reiterate, what isn't battery storage that we're talking about? Small in-home backup, like a UPS, uninterruptible power supply for a computer system, sump pump batteries, and these off-grid solar panel systems, which they're great, but they're not that smart, and they can't really work with the grid the way that we need them to. So why energy storage for you? So now that we've established kind of why we're here, why we launched this program, and what type of energy storage we're talking about, you're all wondering what battery storage can do for you. So first, it provides resiliency. So this is a very personal reason, and it varies for everyone. Personally, I don't need much when it comes to backup power, but some people have big families, medical needs, or some need to keep more appliances running. Some people work at home. Some people have big freezers full of food that they don't want to lose. It looks like a lot of the poll questions, people said refrigerators and freezers were very important. Whether it's storing medication or just a lot of food that you don't want to lose, that's very important. So, that's part of the resiliency, and that's part of the kind of personal reason of why a battery is important to you. So next, many of you have solar PV installed. So batteries are a great pairing with PV. As I showed before, you can charge them when the demand on the grid is low, and you can kind of use that power later in the evening when your demand is higher, but the sun's not shining. And the nice part about pairing that also with resiliency is that when there's a power outage, you'll have a way to recharge your battery. So if you have a standalone battery, you can only charge it when the grid is working, and when it's done, it's done. So you would have to plan for your number of batteries based on that. But if you have PV, you can plan on the battery being recharged by the solar during the daytime. So it doesn't take you completely off grid. So when you have PV and a battery, it's not an off-grid system. So it can make you more self-sufficient when it comes to an outage, but it will not take you off the grid. You'll still have your meter, you'll still get your electric bill, and you'll still be connected to the grid, because that's a major component of getting the incentives in this program and having your battery be able to interact with the grid. More on that later. Third, and this applies only to people who have a time of use rate, which is not many people in Connecticut, but with a time of use rate, you can charge up your battery in the evening when the electricity prices are cheaper, and you can use that energy during the day when electricity prices are usually higher. It's called time shifting. It's not too common in Connecticut to have a time of use rate. Other states like California have many more customers on time of use rates, but customers in Connecticut who have time of use rate can benefit. And fourth, get reimbursed for your capacity when you're not using it. So in a couple of slides, I'll explain how the incentives will work and kind of what your participation will look like. So, when it comes to resiliency, a lot of people think about generators, but with batteries, you can actually get, there's incentives available, which aren't available for generators. So what can your battery packs power? Well, if you have enough of them, you can power pretty much anything. But for most of us who will install 1 to 4 units, anywhere between 10 and 50 kilowatt hours of energy, you'll want to consider the loads in your house using a chart like this. So in this example, we have low demand essentials such as lighting, fans, small electronics, and your refrigerator. Relatively low demand, your refrigerator. And you can power these comfortably with a small battery system, like 1 or 2 power walls. Personally, I would consider the Nintendo to be an essential item, but it's a good idea to make a list of what is absolutely essential in an outage and what is just a nice to have, and set your expectations and your budget based on that. Way over on the bottom right, we have the high demand category, high demand but nice to have. So that would be something like an air conditioning, a central air unit, and a clothes dryer, which again, these items use a lot of energy, and depending on your personal needs, they're not really essential. If you do consider them essential though, you'll need a much larger battery system. And then in the middle, we have things like your clothes washer, a stove, a refrigerator. So, and even a air handler for a forced air system. So it's good to know that even if you have some of these higher demand items like a electric air handler or even a mini split system, they do use a lot of energy, but they don't use it very often. So you can consider their on time relative to their wattage. So you can calculate out how much energy they'll actually use over time. And I have a chart in the next slide that can explain that a little bit better. So this is some more info here. More of an FYI for when you download the slide, so you don't have to remember everything that's on the screen here. We'll make a copy of the presentation available. This chart, which continues on the next slide, is based on one 5 kilowatt or 13.5 kilowatt hour battery, which is about one average sized battery unit. And this column here on the right is the service time for just that appliance, for just that one appliance. So once you begin combining appliances, the service time will decrease. So you'll see here, refrigerator, typical load of about 400 watts on one 13.5 kilowatt hour battery. It can run for about 33 hours straight. Fans, of course, very low usage. You can run those for days. Your internet router, run that for many days. So, once you start kind of combining and mixing and matching these loads here, you'll get an idea for how many batteries you'll really need and how much backup you'll need. It's important to also note that just when you're looking at this chart, some of these appliances, especially air conditioning, have surge power when they start up. So while they may only consume, say, 3,300 watts on operation, there may be a higher surge power in order to start up the equipment. So a single battery may not be able to handle the surge power for every appliance. So this is why it's important to talk to your contractor about your needs, look into the power ratings of all the appliances that you consider critical. So this is something that when you have that conversation with a contractor, after you've kind of made a list of everything that's important to you, they can look at these ratings and they can look at what the power consumption is of these devices, and they can help design a system for you. So here's just that chart continued here. And again, this is assuming one 5 kilowatt, 13.5 kilowatt hour battery system. So now onto the benefits of battery storage versus a generator. So we have some highlights here to help describe why batteries may be a better option. So portable generators, they're affordable, easily accessible, unless you're buying one the day before a storm. So they're small, they're pretty easy to find, and they're relatively cheap. A standby generator, they have high power output for their footprint. They can run on your existing natural gas or propane, and they stay on standby, so you don't have to start them up in an outage. And finally, batteries are silent, have no fuel or emissions, allow you to store and use your solar PV energy, which none of these other systems can do. And they're on standby, just like a standby generator. And most importantly, there's incentives available, which neither of these options can do for you. So for the drawbacks, because we're honest here, the portable generator, as you may know, buying and transporting fuel, it's not always easy, it's messy, you can spill, gas stations might not be open during an outage, they're loud, they have a lot of emissions, they require maintenance, and they're not on standby. So even though they are pretty simple, straightforward machines, they do require some maintenance, they can break down. So for something that you don't use that often, hopefully, you do kind of have to make sure that it's always working when you need it. Standby generators have a pretty high lifetime cost because there's, of course, the installation costs and cost of fuel and the cost of maintenance as it goes on and the cost of fuel as it goes on. So they are expensive. They require professional installation and piped fuel, and they need permits and they're not portable. Batteries also have an upfront cost, although it's not as high, and we'll show that on the next couple of slides. They do require professional installation, so we don't allow DIY installations in this program. You do have to use an eligible contractor. They do require interconnection and permitting, which is a little bit more complicated than just doing a generator, which is just permitting, because this is a grid interactive piece of equipment. Much like your solar PV system, you have to go through an interconnection process. And of course, they're not portable, so you can't take it with you anywhere. So now onto the benefits and how incentives work. So as we discussed earlier, the incentives are going to be split into two categories. We have upfront for what's called passive dispatch and performance-based incentive for what's called active dispatch. Upfront incentive levels will go in steps similar to the solar rebates that many of you participated in, and it'll be based on the total approved capacity. So we expect these incentive steps to be active through the first 3 years of the program, approximately one step per year as things ramp up. The incentives for residential customers are set for market rate and then multiplied by 1.5 for underserved customers, which is those who reside in a distressed municipality. We have a list of what that means, so you can find if your town qualifies for this additional incentive. And then a multiplier of 2 for low-income customers, which again, we can get into some of the details of what qualifies someone as a low-income customer. We expect that step 1 will accommodate about 1,400 residential customers. So on to what passive dispatch means and how to get the upfront incentive. So we'll have some example calculations in the next few slides. But first we should establish just what passive dispatch looks like. So the upfront incentive is in exchange for 10 years of passive dispatch. In the passive dispatch program, that means that during the summer between June and August during non-holiday weekdays, your battery will be pre-programmed to discharge to your home during the day. So this will offset your home's demand on the grid. So your battery will charge either at night or from your solar PV. So in this example, you can see that in July, your battery would discharge over 5 hours from 3 to 8 p.m. on all of these non-holiday weekdays, except for 4th of July, where it would not dispatch because it's a holiday. And then of course it doesn't do that on weekends either. So your battery will be discharged, leaving about 20% capacity in it on all of these days. So assuming you don't need it for backup, if it's sitting idly by because it's been good weather, there's no storms or hurricanes coming, then your battery can work for you. And this is how it earns incentives. This is how it earns the upfront incentive. It's 10 years of participation in this program. So next we'll see how an active dispatch works. So in the active dispatch, it would override any pre-programmed passive event. Typically it would run from anywhere between 1 and 3 hours, and it would be an event where the utility has determined that there is significant demand on the grid, significant strain, say during a heat wave when everyone has their air conditioning running, and they would call on your battery to dispatch to the grid. So instead of just to your home, it would dispatch to the grid, and it would dispatch its entire capacity. So it would completely deplete the battery, and it would send that to the grid. And your participation in those events, which during the summer we expect anywhere from 30 to 60 of them, and during the winter we expect maybe 1 to 5 of them, your participation in that event would be calculated. It would calculate an incentive for that season for you. So if I can back up just a couple slides to show you how that works. The performance incentive would give you $200 per kilowatt on average of what you supply to the grid. So in years 1 through 5. So in this example, a customer that has a 5 kilowatt battery, if they participate fully in every single event for the summer for year 1, then their year 1 summer incentive would be 5 kilowatts times $200 or $1,000 in total for that one season. And then if they participate fully in every winter event for years 1 through 5, it would be 25 times 5 or $125. So we have a few examples of how that works exactly and kind of what that looks like. So this is an example for a small battery system. The estimate is for a standalone battery system, so it doesn't consider the fact that it would be that it could be installed with solar PV and it may be able to get a tax credit. This doesn't consider any tax credit at all. So this is for one small battery system. This would be a single unit. Assuming the total installed cost is about $13,500. At standard rate, the upfront incentive would be $2,700. Underserved rate could be $4,000, and low income it could be $5,400. That would put your net out-of-pocket cost one of these 3 options, and then assuming a full 10-year participation in every single event fully. Your total performance incentives could be up to $9,125 for 10 years of participation. So, considering that your out-of-pocket cost is $9,000 or $10,000, this number here of these maximum 10 years of performance incentives doesn't account for a discount or anything like that, but still, it adds up to make it a pretty viable purchase to have backup power. In the next example, same exact type of example, just with twice the system size, so it's a little bit more expensive, and the incentives are a little bit higher. We should note that the maximum upfront incentive is $7,500. So even if the underserved or low income incentive would calculate it much higher, if it's $300 or $400 per kilowatt hour for these 27 kilowatt hour batteries, it is capped at $7,500. Yep, still the performance incentives over 10 years, assuming full participation, make it pretty viable. And then finally, the large battery storage system, again, capped at $7,500, but those performance incentives can make it still a pretty good option. So moving on to how to get started. So how to participate. EnergyStorageCT.com. Many of you have already gone there. Many of you have actually contacted us through there. We have updates coming soon based on feedback from customers and questions that we've received. So we're working on some website updates to give more information to you and to other prospective customers. Find a contractor or talk to your solar contractor. So many of you have already had solar installed. So we would encourage you to talk to your contractor if you had a good experience with them and see if they install batteries. And if they don't, you can always direct them to us and we can help them become eligible. Chances are if they've done solar, then they're at least considering installing batteries. So we're collecting applications from new contractors about on a weekly basis now. We have probably 15 or 20 approved, and you can find them on EnergyStorageCT.com. And do your research. Think about your essential devices. So in that chart that I had earlier with all the different appliances on there and the chart of the usage of common appliances in your house, you're going to want to think of what's critical for you and what kind of backup you want and how much money you want to spend. You may, of course, there's an upfront cost to it, but over time, these incentives can pay pretty well if you participate well in these active dispatch events for the performance incentive. So granted, does take 10 years to come back, but it can be a pretty good investment if it's something that's important to you. And finally, get a HES audit. So I think if you've had solar installed, then you've probably already had the HES audit done, the Home Energy Solutions audit through your utility. If you have not, then participation in an energy audit program is required to participate in the Energy Storage Solutions program. So with that, I think we can jump to questions. So
Okay,
we'll
great.
see what's coming in.
Thanks so much, Ed. So let's see. There have been a few questions about the ITC and if batteries are eligible for the ITC.
That's a great question. So we always have to start by saying we are not tax attorneys and we can't offer tax advice. But the general idea there is, so if you're buying a battery standalone, it would not qualify for an ITC, at least not currently. If you're pairing it with a new solar PV system and it's part of the cost of the solar PV, it should be. There are some stipulations that has to charge a certain amount from the PV, so you'd have to read the tax code to make sure that it's configured properly. And if you are adding it onto an existing PV system, that is still a question that we are trying to answer. So unfortunately, we don't have the answer to that question, but that's a very, very good addition to our FAQ when we do have the answer. Considering that you're adding it to an existing system, but it's not a new system. So we just want to make sure that we get that answer right for you.
Okay, great. And another question that was asked a few times was, will these slides be available? And the answer is yes, this will be recorded and the slides will be available on our webpage, which is energystorageCT.com. Okay. So there was a question, is there financing available?
So through the Green Bank or through a Green Bank product, the Smarting loan does finance battery storage. So yes, it's not a requirement that you use Green Bank financing. You can use any financing you like. You can talk to your contractor or your local bank. Some installers out there, which I don't believe there's any approved in this program yet, but some offer kind of lease type options where you can pair it with a leased solar PV system. So we have not seen any of those contractors come into the program yet. It's still kind of early, I think, for them. Usually the large companies take a little while to get started. But yes, the Smarting loan can finance battery storage, and that's the only financing product that we have available through the Green Bank.
Okay, great. And these two questions kind of go hand in hand. So what happens after the 10-year period? Does the utility no longer take power from the battery? And then the follow-up question was, what is the expected lifespan of the battery? So 10 years.
Those are great questions. Yeah, so with the expected lifespan of the battery, I mean, they haven't been around for 10 years yet, so we don't know exactly how long it will last, but each manufacturer kind of has their own estimate of the degradation per year. You know, it can be anywhere from 0.5% to 1% per year of capacity depletion. We are doing a study now, the Green Bank is doing a study on end of life for batteries and kind of what that should look like in terms of recycling. So part of that study will be when we should actually start to be concerned about this, you know, when we should expect to start having to recycle old batteries. So, you know, beyond 10 years, we do require that that warranties last for at least 10 years. So beyond 10 years, I don't think we can make any real guesses as to how long they will last. But for the what happens after 10 years, like will the utility still draw from your battery? If the program is no longer running and the term of the incentive is up, then no.
Okay, great. And another question is passive dispatch canceled if there are predicted weather events?
That's a great question. I knew we were going to get that one. So the utilities, and again, note, the Green Bank is a program administrator alongside the utilities, but we are not the entity that's kind of controlling the battery. We're administering the program and kind of more of the upfront part of it, whereas the utilities are going to be sending the signals to the battery dispatchers to say, you know, dispatch during this time or don't dispatch during this time. But what we have been kind of stating throughout is, you know, we want people to have them for resiliency. So if there's an expected storm coming, then a dispatch would be canceled. Or if there's an active event, you could simply just decline it. You don't have to participate in the active event. So, so dispatch can be canceled if there's an event, like a storm event coming.
Great, thanks, Ed. And another question is, I installed a solar system and a battery back in 2021, but it wasn't energized until 2020. Does it apply for this new incentive? So I think we can also tie this question to any system that already has an installed battery.
Mm-hmm. So if your system has been energized already, if your battery system has been energized, you cannot qualify for the upfront incentive, but you could qualify for the performance incentive. Some of you may be familiar with the Connected Solutions program. You could also go through that program, which would be similar. It's similar to the active dispatch. But yeah, you can't get the performance, or I'm sorry, the passive dispatch upfront incentive. But if your system's already been energized, you can still qualify for the active.
Okay. So there's a question, are there any issues associated with pairing the batteries with a leased solar system?
So that would be a great question for your lease provider. So if you currently own, if you currently lease a PV system and you want to buy a battery, as long as it doesn't interfere with any of your solar system owner's equipment, it should be okay. But again, since they own the equipment, you're going to want to really make sure with them that it's okay first.
Okay. And what if a customer does not want to own or finance a battery? Would they be able to lease it?
So I think I mentioned earlier, we have not seen any lease providers come in to the program yet, but we are prepared for them. We expect lease providers to come in. Off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of who has expressed interest in this, and I think it was Sunrun, Sonova, SunPower, possibly Posigen, and Vivint. We've kind of had some brief conversation with them about, you know, kind of coming into Connecticut. They're sort of the big lease providers for solar in our rebate program. So we're expecting those options to be available, but as of right now, they're not.
Okay, great. So there was a question. Would a customer be able to decline in a passive or active event, or would they have to enroll in both the passive and active events?
So assuming you're eligible for both and you're applying, say you're applying for the active, or I'm sorry, assuming you're applying for the upfront incentive for passive dispatch, you do have to do both. Residential customers they can't pick one or the other. unless they're transferring because they've already installed their battery and energized it. But if you're doing upfront incentive, you have to get the performance incentive. But for active events, you can decline them. The expectation is that they would be predicted about 24 hours in advance, and you could be notified that an active event is going to happen tomorrow. If for some reason you don't want to participate in it, you can decline it, but it would count against your average participation for that season, so it would lower your incentive.
Okay, there is a question. Do you need to produce more power than you use? And I'm assuming that they mean do you need to have a higher solar production than your battery?
That's a good question. So it's going to depend on what your battery needs are and how, like, so if you want to be totally autonomous during a power outage, you'll need to charge your battery as quickly as you're using the battery during the day. Actually more quickly because you'll be using it at night too. So again, that's a question that comes down to you and your contractor of what your PV system is capable of doing throughout the year and what your needs are throughout the day and throughout the year.
Okay, and
oh, sorry, I should just also note that the battery can be charged from the grid though, so it doesn't have to be charged from PV. Although again, when it comes to qualifying for a federal ITC, that can also get a little bit sticky if you're installing a battery paired with PV that only charges from the grid. I don't believe you would be qualified to get the ITC. So.
Okay, and there was a question. If the grid is out, can you continue to charge the battery from your solar PV and discharge the power to your home?
Yes.
Okay. So if a solar system is older, so say it was installed 6 years ago, would they still be eligible to purchase a battery?
So you certainly can purchase a battery, but we can't guarantee that nothing in your PV system would need to be reconfigured or upgraded. So again, that's a discussion for a contractor, and it kind of depends on the battery system's capabilities. If it can charge from AC power that comes out of your PV inverter, that's probably a simpler solution. But if you want something that interacts with your PV system, then you would probably have to replace some equipment.
Okay, and what if a customer reached out to their solar installer about this program, but they are not an eligible contractor? What should they do?
You can direct them to me directly, or you can send them to the energystorageCT.com website, and they can apply to become eligible on there. And if they have questions about becoming eligible, they can contact us about how to go about the application. If they were a contractor in the residential solar program, it should be a very easy application for them to participate in this one.
Okay, and the same question, but for a battery. What if their technology is not on the approved list?
So right now there might actually be no batteries on the fully approved technology list. We have equipment that's kind of partially approved from the Connected Solutions program. But right now we do need to get an application for new technology from every battery manufacturer that wants to participate in this program. So we are working on that now. Really it's just make sure that your contractor knows whether it's eligible or not. And you can always direct them to us and we can get in touch with the manufacturer and get them to submit an application.
Okay, great. And there is a customer here that is already enrolled in Connected Solutions. So would they be able to transfer to Energy Storage Solutions?
Sergio, if you're still on the line, please correct me if I'm wrong, but you can transfer from Connected Solutions, but you can't do it forever. I think it's only for the first year.
Yeah, so within the first year of the program, so 2022, you are able to transfer over into energy storage solutions, but you can only enroll your battery into the active portion. So essentially, it's the same idea as Connected Solutions, the active dispatch that you are currently enrolled in, but you will also have to dedicate your battery for 10 years to this program.
Yeah, because it's not a brand new system, you will not be eligible for the upfront incentive, but they will be allowed to participate in the active dispatch events and eligible for the performance-based incentives.
Thank you both. That's helpful.
Okay. So there was a question, are the incentives available to a limited number of participants?
So it is based on capacity, and actually I can jump back a few slides to show. So the first incentive level has a capacity of 10 megawatts, which we expect to be, maybe 1,000, maybe 1,500 systems, probably closer to 1,000 systems. And then after that, it'll go down to the next incentive level, which is lower. And then that will be a slightly larger block of incentives or of capacity, followed by the third, which we expect to get to by the third year. So it will decrease over time. So, incentives will not get better than they are right now. But for right now, we expect this first block to last us probably through the year at the rate that we're going.
Okay, great. And there was a mention before earlier with the poll and a few questions on their well pumps and how long the battery could power those. So if you can just go back to that slide, I know it was on the second one at the bottom.
It's somewhere in here. This one, well pump.
Right there.
So a well pump by itself on one small battery pack, about 19 hours, and that's running straight for 19 hours.
Okay, great. And then there were a few questions on the physical space requirements for a battery. So what do those look like? Are they installed in a basement or a garage? And do they need to be installed indoors versus outdoors?
Sure. Yeah, this picture is not to scale at all. So I believe that a Tesla Powerwall is probably the size of maybe like a 40-inch TV, but mounted sideways, probably about twice as thick. So I'm not sure if that's the best way to describe it. But they should be mounted, if you live in a flood area, you should mount it above ground. So probably not in a basement if your basement floods. They should be mounted indoors, someplace that they're not going to get too hot or too cold. Batteries don't perform well when they're very, very hot or very, very cold. But every battery has an install sheet of where it should be installed. So it'll have an operating temperature. Again, things are just better to keep inside, like in a garage. This Generac power cell, this one is kind of the size of like a water heater. These are two. So that's, again, the scale is off here, but depending on how many you get, probably no bigger than a water heater.
Okay, and there was a question about would you lose your net metering options by going with this program, and how do they interact with one another?
Great question. And so no, you won't lose your net metering if you just add a battery to your existing PV system that's net metered. If you add new PV to your system, the new PV will be on the new tariff, but your old PV will still stay on net metering, so you'll be kind of split up. So short answer is no, you won't lose net metering.
Okay, great. And there was a question if the system comes with a warranty.
Yes, we require, was it 6 years or 10 years for a
10
workmanship
years,
warranty?
yes,
10-year
yes. So
workmanship.
your installer will cover a 10-year workmanship warranty, which covers their labor and installation. And often the actual battery itself, the manufacturer will have around a 10-year warranty as well.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on the battery.
Yep, and we have minimum specs for what a battery, in order to qualify for this program, the battery has to have minimum warranty specs, which it's in our contractor resources on the energystorageCT.com website. Let's get back to the end here. Somewhere in here. So yeah, we have the program guidelines listed in the Energy Storage CT link here. And if you go to the contractor resources, you'll find the program guidelines, which have everything you need to know, all the finer details that are more contractor focused, and any program rules that you want to look up, you can find them in there.
Okay. This question was a little long and lengthy, and I think it's going to turn more into a statement, but it is the passive dispatch is typically at the same time at which solar PV is at its max during the day. So during a passive dispatch, what goes back onto the grid, considering the home has its own demand, the solar panel and the solar panels are producing, the batteries are providing backup to the grid or supplementing home demand and the grid. So
yes, so I got that question almost verbatim the other day from a contractor, and I'm wondering if it's if it's that contractor who asked the question again. It's a great question, and I think unfortunately I'm going to have to kick that to the utilities to answer, because it kind of gets into metering or the wiring diagrams and exactly where power is flowing during that time. So unfortunately, I'm not an electrical engineer, so we'll probably have to talk to the interconnection department to get a solid answer on that question.
okay,
So,
and
sorry, I can't answer that.
So Ed, can you go back to the example of a small, medium, or large system? This question was, is there a real world experience on what active dispatch rebate would be versus the max example that we have right there?
Yeah, so in this example, I mean, this is just assuming that you participate in every event. You know, let me pause my screen for a second and I can actually pull up what that looks like. If I think we have a minute so I can show you. Okay, can you see my screen here?
Yes.
Okay, so this is just kind of a peek behind the curtain of how we came up with that. But if you lowered this amount to, you know, say instead of participating at an average of 5 kilowatts per season, you only participated in 4, then, you know, these would be $800. So, and then these would be, what, 500. So, and we'll assume full winter participation because that's a lot easier to achieve. So, you know, your total would certainly be lower. And that kind of comes down to how much you're participating in these events. So if there's 60 events, you have a better chance, you're better off with not participating in some of them than you are if there's 30 events and you don't participate in some of them. So the more events there are, the more chance you have to get that average up. So if there's 60 events in a season and you decline one, it's probably not going to hurt your average that much. But if you decline 20 of them, it certainly will. So this kind of brings down the 10-year max of incentives by participating at 80% in the summer instead of 100%. But again, still comes out to be pretty good. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, that was great. Very helpful. Okay.
I think we have about 2 minutes left in our scheduled time. So
Okay, we'll make this the last
questions.
question then. So the question is, by charging the battery with solar during active dispatch, will that reduce what I put into the grid as my solar bank? So basically impact that net.
I think that was I think I got that same question from that contractor too. So so if you charge your battery instead of sending it off to the grid, is that the question? What happens if you charge your battery instead of shipping it off to the grid?
Yes.
Then yes, that would lower the amount of energy that you eventually send back out to the grid. But remember, there are times that when your battery is discharging, you may not have a load and it may go through the net meter and go back to the grid. So it will impact what your net metering looks like because now you have a new load, and you may be using it off grid, like for power outages. But I don't expect it to make a significant change. Okay. Sergio, I don't know if there's anything you want to add on that, or if that's accurate.
No, I think that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone. If we didn't get to your questions today, please feel free to submit a question on the fillable form, which you can find on our home's webpage at energystorageCT.com.
All right, thanks everybody, and have a great night. We'll make a copy of this available by email, and we'll post it on the energy storage website. So thanks a lot.